So, welcome back, everyone, to our channel. Today we have a fantastic episode about biomechanical assessments in paracycling with a fascinating guest. Our guest today is Chris Balser, one of the first generation of bike fitters in the world, who started off by using the fit kit back in the 80s, when bike fit was more or less making the transition from bike sizing, which wasn't necessarily the clinical practice that we have today, established today. If you don't know what the fit kit is, or bike sizing with Ben Sirota, I suggest you watch the video on the history of bike fitting. I'll put a link down below, but today's not about that. Today we will be reviewing a session that Chris had with Clara Brown. For those who are unaware, Clara was, Clara is the current C3 500 time trial world champion and Omnium world champion. So, Chris, quite an illustrious guest that you had there.
Yes, by surprise. I didn't know who she was, to be honest with you. I mean, I was introduced to her by a friend of mine who I've worked with for a while, who's also a Paralympic cyclist. And he just said, hey, my girlfriend wants to come in and get fit. I didn't give me her name or anything. I'm like, cool, come on in. I got time. And it didn't even click, just working with her, trying to solve the problem.
Yeah. And we know that Clara has a spinal cord injury due to an unfortunate accident when she was younger, but that resulted in neurological decreases in proprioception on the left hand side and reduced motor control on the right hand side, correct? So can you tell us in practice what does this mean for her cycling ability?
So in practice, it's hard to really know what it means, but I'll tell you this: all of her controls are on the left side. She doesn't complain about the sensory motor. The motor is an issue to the degree that she has to push her foot into the cleat. She's got an anteriorly rotated right pelvis, difficulty getting over the top of the pedal stroke, and her foot is kind of stuck in a plantar flexion or drop foot position. When she's riding. And she tried to accommodate for that by making the saddle super high. And she didn't very, very high, which made it too high for the opposing leg, for the contralateral leg. And she was just really open to everything. I didn't know what to do. So we just started messing around and we tried a bunch of stuff. And I determined more what wouldn't work before we decided what would work. And it really had to do with, it had more to do with identifying the biggest issue, or the main feature that was creating a problem for her when cycling, and that ended up being the foot.
Yeah, and it's very much often the case that we have to do things trial and error, because we never know how the individual in front of us is going to react to something. So in your initial email, the first thing that caught my eye was the fact that Claire had a position which was revised in the wind tunnel, and that was kind of imposing some restrictions to the rest of the fit that you were about to perform. Now, I would probably do things the other way around. I would probably perhaps try to find a fit to the function of the athlete, and then I would take that fit and try to optimize it in the wind tunnel. But, I would put the function first and the aerodynamics optimization in second. What are your thoughts on this? How did you get around this kind of imposed restrictions?
Well, first of all, I agree with you. I'm always function first. And while working with her, if I came to the conclusion that she wouldn't be able to improve her pedaling without making changes, I would have suggested that we make the changes and also consult with the committee to see whether or not that's okay, and or get her back in the wind tunnel and see, what we can do within the range of function. I was concerned. I was concerned because I thought that I saw some restrictions due to the position. But when I moved it around and pretended that I had the liberty of changing everything, in all honesty, I moved the bars at one point were 4 centimeters higher. The saddle was, I took, because I could ask for, I could get an exemption for the saddle. I moved the saddle forward, thinking it would open up the hip, move the saddle back, move it up, move it down. I did a bunch of stuff and came to the conclusion there was no real penalty. There was not a significant penalty given her position, in so much that I couldn't get around it. But I'm I take my work seriously, and I never want to put the person into an injurious position. So in my practice, I would always try to get function proper before working on form. And then I would want to see whether or not that form is sustainable.
Yeah.
And so don't always have the opportunity to do that. I think that, it's almost like the idea of the bike fit and aero fit are almost diametrically opposed. People are like, oh no, he's not going to make you aero, or the aero guys we're like, oh, the aero guys aren't going to let you pedal. But I think that there's a way to achieve both. And it really is how fast are you going? I mean, what matters beyond how fast you're going from point A to B?
Yeah. So absolutely. Aerodynamics is all about speed, how fast you're going. The slower you go, the less the aerodynamics will matter, and vice versa. And I find it there's always a gap where you can compromise both and get the best of both worlds. And it's not a small gap as people think. It's quite a large gap. So going back to the fit, before coming to you, Clara saw another bike fitter. Why do you think she felt the need to come and see you? And what can we learn from the session she did previously with the other bike fitter?
So I think that she actually came to see me because her boyfriend did not think that the fit had done enough for her position, and encouraged her to come and see me. She didn't know me, and I don't know that she even really trusted me at first. And I didn't say anything negative about the bike fit that had been done. I think when somebody's been fit, I never know how good the fitter is. And so the problem that I have, which I guess it's not a problem, but I think I am stuck in this vortex of trying to understand why he or she did what they did, so that it can help me move down the road. That can be a limitation too, because I can doubt myself. I saw one thing, for instance, a perfect example is her cleat was all the way back on the right foot. Now that would make sense if you're trying to reduce or increase the range of motion in that right leg coming over the top of the pedal stroke, which is clearly an issue for her, especially giving her the foot that was in the plantar flex position. So the last thing in the world I thought I'd do would be moving the cleat forward, but ironically that turned out to be one of the most, that was probably the most significant thing that I did in the fit, not just by my own perspective, but by the sound of the trainer, by the watch, by her boyfriend, and by herself. So I think that with that it's difficult. It's hard for me to feel confident about some of the changes because I don't know who did the work and why they did what they did. I will say that that what was remarkable to me when we were discussing the other fitters, just that he approached her and said, "I can improve your fit." Not exactly in those words. Right. And I think that I would just ask people to use caution when somebody's approaching you about a position, because with that, there are certain assumptions. If I look at you and I say, I can make your fit better, I've already made the assumption that there's something wrong with your bike. Yeah. And I don't understand the limitations of your body or how you're going to present. Yeah. And it could be that you come in to see me, and if I really find out that you actually have a great fit, even looking the way that I don't think you should look on a bike, what do I do then?
Yeah. So let me let me take that you just said. Did it ever happen to you that you had someone come in and they were just fine, and what do you do then? Do you just look? Everything is fine. You don't need. What you need to do now is train. And because sometimes we have to be that honest. We have to say, look, there's nothing wrong with your fit. I'm not going to change anything. What you need to do now is just enjoy cycling and enjoy going out.
Yeah, I've had that happen for sure. I probably once or twice a year, somebody comes in and I look at their position and I move a few things around and I say, you know what, the changes that I'm making are not having significant impact on your position. You actually look really good. And ironically, some of these people have fit themselves, and And even more astonishingly, one of these guys was fit over the internet, which is like my, don't ever get fit over the internet. And I was like, it's amazing. I mean, you look great on the bike.
Yeah.
And so what I tell them is that there's no value. And so I don't charge them. And well, some fitters would think that's a mistake. These people are a huge referral resource for me because, you know, I was honest with them.
Yeah.
And I think that's super important.
One of the things that I find the hardest is to gain the trust, because we're talking about changing things in the bike that will have an impact on them. So if they're not honest with us, and if they don't trust us, you know, those changes they're gonna react to those changes and resist those changes. So one of the things I find it the hardest is to gain their trust, because we only have 1 hour and a half to gain their trust. And it's very difficult. For me, it's one of the most challenging things to do.
I absolutely agree, and we've talked about this, and I think it's true that, you know, you need to trust your fitter, and I believe that the qualities that you look for in a fitter is they have to be humble. You know, I don't have all the answers. I'm good at figuring stuff out, and together we'll come to a solution. But for me, if I'm come across as super confident, like this is what we need to do, and this is going to make it better, that's a warning sign for me.
Yeah.
Because I really don't know. I mean, I have an idea. I've fit, 800, 900 people a year for the last 3 years. I've seen a lot of stuff, but what I do know from that experience is that the same intervention will have significantly different results based on an individual.
Yeah.
And even if they look the same and they seem to have the same range of motion and everything else, it just doesn't work. There's no patent approach.
Yeah. And if there's one thing that we both know from our PhDs is that human variability is very much present, and we very much need to account for it. So going back to the session, you used a technique that I found very curious because I don't use it, and I'd like to know more about it, which is why do you ask your athletes to reverse pedal? And what was your experience with this test with Clara?
So I do the reverse pedaling to find out what the range of motion is like without the inertia of forward pedaling. So forward pedaling, our muscles know how to do it. They're trained to do it. And we have the inertia of the working leg to get us over the non-working leg's top dead center in the pedal stroke. When somebody reverse pedals, I can determine what the range of motion of the hip is like based on how much they slow down approaching top dead center and how much their hip travels in the Y plane. So people come in and they're like, and this works especially well for people that are in really aero-slammed positions. I say, well, that's really a great looking position.
And so you find them tilting to get over the pedal stroke?
Well, they're either tilting or they're bouncing. They're bouncing. And what I say to them is I say, like for instance, perfect example is dual power meter. I can take somebody who's got drastically different left and right side power and put them in a more upright position and the power will balance. It's not because one leg's stronger, it's because it's working harder to get over the tighter hip a lot of the time. And so what I do is I use that as an objective and subjective experience for them. I can say, look, this is how, do you feel how you're stopping? For her, she couldn't even barely get over the right side. Some of that was motor, but a lot of it was range of motion. So I take my finger and put it between the inferior aspect of their iliac crest and then have them backwards pedal, and my finger would get crushed between the femur and that. And what I explained is, well, can you understand now that if there is no space here, how much more your other leg has to work to get you over the top?
Yeah.
Why we need to address it.
Yeah. So we're talking about the length tension relationship, and those cross bridges are gone. It's completely just, there's no way to contract anymore. So they're off the zone of the optimal contraction zone. Yeah, totally understand that. Tell us anything that you've done, because taking this, because I know you like to look at people on the bike, because that's what they're going to be doing. That's where we should look at them. I totally agree. I do something off the bike to gauge those muscles that we just talked, the hip flexors, to gauge how they function. It's something called the Trendelenburg sign, and how well can they lift the knee up? Is it one stronger than the other, etc., etc. Did you do anything off the bike? Did you do any tests or any training with Clara off the bike at all?
The amount of work that I do off bike is limited significantly because of COVID. That I'm much more cautious about how much I get in the way of somebody. What I did, I observe her. I observe everybody standing. I can read a standing posture very well. Watch her walk. I could tell that there's a compensation pattern, a foot drop on that side, and I watch her put her shoes on, move around. She has a brace that she can use in her shoes. Unfortunately, it doesn't fit in her cycling shoes.
Right.
And it holds her foot more flat. But a perfect example of why I look on the bike is, for instance, I was trying to get her to drive through her glutes more on the right side in an effort to try to get her to move from that fixed plantar flexion into a more dorsiflex position, or even a neutral foot position, whatever that is. And her nervous system response to that was, tremor, spasm. It was just not happening. And so what I learned from that is that maybe she shouldn't actually have her foot fixed in that position, because when she moves from that plantar flex into a more neutral position, her leg muscles don't know how to work. Yeah. And or they move into they don't know how to, the motor coordination isn't there, and so they start spasming. So yeah, I mean, maybe if she wasn't, I would have checked her range of motion and seen what was going on. But if I can't see it on the bike, I mean, the bike is the context, and I do the hip flexor. I look at the hip flexor and stuff like that to see how much they roll. But then I ask myself, well, how much does that matter really on a bike? If they've got good range of motion, I don't need to do internal and external rotation unless I see something on the bike that suggests they have a limitation. If they're traveling laterally and it's not a tight lateral line on that leg or a short leg on the opposing leg, I'll get them off the bike and say, whoa, see what's going on here? Or I'll grab their hips, and if I feel snapping over the greater trochanter or a lot of tension on the lateral line, I'll take them off the bike and check that stuff out. But most of the stuff I do, I get them on the bike, and when I see something that I think might need to be tested off the bike, I move that route. And it would be a little bit without the COVID. I mean, historically, I've spent more time. I look at them, I touch them. I want to feel the vertebrae, see how much space between the vertebrae, see how they rotate either direction, eyes closed, marching in place. What do you do? You know, where do your feet end up? All that stuff.
Yeah, and taking on from that, to increase the function on her motor leg, the functional leg, you attempted something that you actually are very successful and renowned for, which is your biofeedback protocol. Tell us what was the premise behind attempting biofeedback with her pedaling technique, and what was the result of that?
So my experience is that I believe a lot of cyclists pedal with the forefoot primarily, and they do that because that's what's attached. Yep. The whole foot's there. So I mean, and a good way you can see this yourself is if you take your shoes off and you pound the front of your foot into the ground or pound the heel into the ground, you'll notice that it's unstable, and that your leg doesn't want to apply sufficient force. But if you slam your whole foot into the ground, you get a lot of force because the nervous system knows that that's stable. This is just a theory. I mean, it's based on some reflex patterns and things like that. But what I've noticed with cyclists is they disproportionately attend to the forefoot, and in the attention to the forefoot, they tend to move. The recruitment patterns move distally toward distal quadriceps, closer to the knee. And it doesn't matter as much what the angle of the foot is, but where they're driving in the foot. Right. Okay. So what I did with her is I saw her. She was anteriorly rotated right, and she was plantar flexing right, which made a mess of that right hip range of motion. And so what I thought to myself is I'm going to give her some glute recruitment stuff, see if her glutes work, whether she has any control over them. And then I'm going to see if that glute recruitment actually has an impact on that anterior pelvic rotation, because we know how it goes. And so there was that in combination with the idea that if she's using larger muscle groups, maybe it will deflect that ankle angle some and get her more room when pedaling. Yeah. And it failed. I mean, it just didn't work. And I think that's an important that's a super important thing to know as a fitter. Is like, I mean, this protocol works. I would say she's the first person that it really hasn't worked with since I've been using it. And I mean, everybody has different levels of success, but it was absolutely the wrong thing to do. And not that it injured or anything, but it was clear to me that this was something we were going to work around. This was going to be the part of the position that needed to be accommodated for.
Right.
Not corrected through a biofeedback protocol. She did have control over the recruitment. She could get her glutes to fire more. She could actually get her foot to dorsiflex more. The problem is that her nervous system wasn't proven on it.
Yeah. And one of the pivotal things about your session was actually the cleats, right? Can you tell us more about what you did that kind of made a breakthrough in the fit finally?
So when I looked at her position, I noticed she had the hip thing, and her left leg was way overextended, and that was her good leg. That's the powerful leg. And so the first thing that I wanted to try to achieve a neutral pelvis. For me, I fit around the pelvis. I want the pelvis to be neutral, moving in equal symmetry and rotation and obliquity. And that's really, to me, the objective. So I started shimming up her shoe and raising her saddle. The left shoe I shimmed up, and I ended up putting 8 millimeters under there, which is a massive amount of shim for me. I'm never more than 3 with regular clients. Even, you could have a half-inch leg length discrepancy. And I'm probably not going to put more than 3 millimeters in there because our ankles accommodate. They make up for it. But because she was so plantar flex, the distance was greater. And I probably could have used more, but I was concerned. I was concerned about her existing motor patterns, how well she had adapted to this position. She obviously is fast, so there's a little bit of concern about me slowing her down. But clearly, she was getting her left leg back, and it was increasing the range of motion for her right leg, which was good. And so I thought to myself, well, this looks good, but you're still anteriorly rotated right, pretty significantly. And so I checked to see whether or not it was an arm thing. So, we motor control right arm. So I added pads. I brought the pad back. I moved the extension back. I did a lot of stuff to try to see whether or not the arm would impact the pelvic rotation, whether there was tension between the ilium and her scapula or whatever part of the body would be pulling it, and it didn't have any impact at all. So, and she did not have scoliosis. I had her standing and bent forward, and it was fine. So what I did is I looked at the foot and I said, well, this guy's got her cleat all the way back. That's great. I'm going to leave that because that's going to help her get over the top. And I just decided to change it. I said, well, we'll just see it. And I'm thinking to myself, this is definitely the wrong thing to do. It's going to reduce the range of motion. But what happened when I moved the cleat forward is that her foot relaxed. And I have no idea why, but it relaxed. And it didn't stay fixed in plantar flexion. Her pelvis rolled back so that she was no longer able to be rotated, and it squared off. And all of a sudden, the trainer sounded as smooth as somebody who didn't have spinal cord injury or even any kind of injury. Yeah. And we all sat there with our jaws hanging open. And I don't believe that it does me any good to try to sound like I have all the answers. So I told them basically my script. I said, I was never going to change that. I'm like, that's the one part of this position coming in that I was sure would be best, because it's got the cleat closer to your heel, which is making it so that the thigh doesn't come up as high. How was I to know that moving it? And now she's all the way forward on that side. It's illogical in the context of normal human function or somebody who doesn't have a spinal cord injury, but for some reason, her nervous system loved it. And her feedback to me afterwards was that, I feel what it's like to have a leg again, or to have a leg. Yeah. And that was profound. And every time I do this, it's a lesson. And the lesson is, you know what? You just don't know. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's the human variability. That reminds me of something that is very common in podiatry, which is called the neuromuscular effect, which is someone has a foot that is pronating too much. So you put a wedge, a heel wedge, to kind of counteract that pronation. And what ends up happening is actually, instead of being more centered, it's pronating even more. And what what the theory says is that it's a central mediated effect, and they acknowledge that there's something there trying to avoid that pronation, and so they activate the muscles to increase that pronation even further. And so because of this weird central mediating kind of all of this proprioception going on, we never know what's going on unless which is why this is such an interesting profession, because you've got all these theories and we have all the science behind us, and then you test it and voila, it works for that person, and if it works for that person, it's job done, right? It shouldn't have, because the cleats were. How much did you move them forward? Was it everything forward?
It was. So what happened is, the first thing I did is I staggered in the exact opposite way to see what the impact of that would be. So whenever I find something that we believe is better, I do the exact opposite to add confidence to what I'm doing. So I did the exact opposite, and then I just started staggering. And it ended up being that I moved that cleat all the way forward, and their other cleat is somewhere in the mid. And I'm like a non-staggering guy. I'm one of those guys that's like, hey, the stagger's doing a lot to the spine, to the pelvis, everything. But then again, I had to get out of my own way, and I watched and listened, got the feedback. Her boyfriend, Noah, and I were standing behind her, watching her pelvis. And, I was reluctant to move the cleat all the way forward, but it was clearly, that was where it needed to be. And we all believed that it was where it be. The sound of the spinner, the trainer, there was no more undulation. It was just a linear sound. She was comfortable. Her range of motion was great. It's like somebody had like tapped her on the back with a wand. So we kept it. So all the way forward on the right and about mid-foot on the back on the left.
Yeah. And do you think that I was saying, do you think that you could even go even further? Because with speed plates, you have plates that can extend that, but then that would be too forward.
I don't know. I wouldn't know without testing, but I definitely feel like I could go higher on the left leg. I was just scared to. Yeah. I mean, it's 8 millimeters. I've never stacked somebody 8 millimeters. Yeah. That's a lot. And it was short of where she needed to be, but I just wasn't willing to do more. And I told her that. I said, listen, this is a lot. I'm scared. You go ride, and if it works, we can add more. And if not, if not, we can take some out.
And she's been giving you feedback, has she?
She's very pleased with the position.
Okay.
And I assume they're going to come back shortly, and we'll work on it some more. I think I believe she could use more, but who knows? You don't know without testing. I was comfortable with I was nervous with what we left with, but I was comfortable with how she sounded and how she looked and how she felt.
Well, that's great. I mean, that's job done, right? So before we go, I just want to say thank you, Chris, for doing this little episode. Thank you to Clara as well for letting us share your session. And I want to send a special thanks to you because I admire the way you do things. Not only because you had the courage to get into a business that was completely new and uncertain, but what I really respect and admire is, which is something I also share, is your fear of stagnating in knowledge and becoming obsolete. Which, Chris, this is something that we see time and time again with people, not only in our profession, but actually more so in the world of cycling. This, you get a knowledge, you think it's valid for 5 decades, and that's it. And I have my own personal fear of stagnating, and I keep reading and etc. and keep talking to people. And I've met you not long ago. And you have the same approach to life and to your practice as well,
And that's absolutely what I admire about you. I mean, it's rare to find somebody who isn't so strongly opinionated about any one thing, and it's a tremendous asset in this business, because I think that actually my greatest liability is my predictive mind. This is what we're going to do, and this is going to be the outcome. And then not being able to walk back on it. I think it's humility to be able to walk back and say, you know what, this adjustment, I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. And that makes us stronger because, being able to say, yeah, I'm wrong. I've been wrong in the past. I'm going to be wrong in the future. It just makes us very humble, right? Yeah. So thank you very much, Chris. I'm going to let you go. You're a busy man with 900 fits.
Well, I don't know if it's 900 this year. I mean, I'm trying to get it down. That was 2 years ago, 926, which was insane. But it's less now. I think 700 this year, probably 700. That's all I do. That's all I do.
That's a very good number. Anyway, thanks a lot, and we'll talk soon.
Awesome.
Cheers.